Okay, let's start with a quote. The theme of the film, from the beginning, was the terror of the bomb. Mankind had created the bomb, now nature was going to take revenge on mankind. So I decided to do the original Godzilla from 1954.
Oh, very nice.
And that is a good choice. Let's start at the very beginning.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the history behind this film, just to give a bit of context as to what Godzilla is and what it represents.
I think that would be useful because most people, when you think Godzilla, I dare say they just think, big monster rampaging around destroying Tokyo.
Yes.
But Godzilla is a lot deeper than that.
Especially in the original.
Yes, which is why I chose this one, because I think it's my favourite. Spoilers.
Oh!
So on August 6th, Little Boy, an enriched uranium gun-type fission weapon, was dropped on Hiroshima, and 3 days later, Fat Man, a plutonium implosion-type nuclear weapon, was dropped on Nagasaki. Scholars have extensively studied the effects of the bombings on the social and political character of subsequent world history and popular culture. One of the most famous examples of this is Ishiro Honda's Godzilla from 1954. We know that it's kind of an allegory for those horrendous bombings that happened at the end of World War II. Have you ever heard of Castle Bravo?
Isn't that one of the American bases or something?
So, any guess what Castle Bravo is?
Doesn't ring a bell with me.
So this is kind of more history side of things. Castle Bravo was the first in a series of high-yield thermonuclear weapon design tests conducted by the United States at Bikini Atoll.
I'm familiar with Bikini.
Yes, in the Marshall Islands, as part of Operation Castle. Detonated on the 1st of March 1954, the device was the most powerful nuclear device detonated by the United States and its first lithium deuteride-fueled thermonuclear weapon. I think I pronounced that okay.
Fun fact, Castle Bravo is the Monarch base in Godzilla King of Monsters.
Right. This will all tie into what I'm talking about. So, yeah, big tests of these big thermonuclear weapons, and it led to the unexpected radioactive contamination of areas to the east of Bikini Atoll. At the time, it was the most powerful artificial explosion in history. I might get the pronunciation of this completely wrong. Daigo Fukaru Maru, also known as Lucky Dragon 5.
Oh, I heard about this, yep.
Was a Japanese tuna fishing boat with a crew of 23 men, which was contaminated by nuclear fallout from the United States Castle Bravo thermonuclear weapon at Bikini Atoll.
Yes, they were irradiated.
Yeah, so the crew suffered ARS, which is acute radiation syndrome, for a number of weeks after the tests. All recovered except Kubayama Eikichi, the boat's chief radio man. He died on September 23rd, unfortunately, from complications of radiation sickness. So this event, this is why I've prefaced this event, would inspire Japanese producer Tomoyuki Tanaka to begin development of the now infamous giant monster film titled
Godzilla.
The Giant Monster from 20,000 Miles Beneath the Sea. It wasn't Godzilla. It technically was, but it was called The Giant Monster from 20,000 Miles Beneath the Sea.
20,000 miles?
Well, it's interesting because you can also compare it to The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, which came out
he was also inspired by that film, which I think
The Beast of 20,000 Fathoms is pretty much what the Godzilla Zilla movie was based on.
The 1998 version. Yeah.
I think they're all kind of tied in together.
To be fair, they should have really not called that one Godzilla.
Now, it's very interesting you mention all these things because it's part of what I wrote about in my dissertation for university.
Yeah.
And what I found through my kind of close examination of it was the fact that it was more of a synchronic social response to bigger issues.
Yeah.
It was a cultural response from both the Americans and their idea of nuclear war tests and things because they're very pro nuclear war tests.
I'm going to get onto the American cut because I find that quite an interesting sort of
whereas
to this
the Japanese take it from more of a victimization standpoint.
Yeah. So Tanaka enlisted director Ishiro Honda, special effects director Eiji Tsuburaya. I'm sorry if I mispronounce any of these names. And executive producer Iwo Mori to begin work on the film with the now title
Gojira.
Project G.
Oh,
It was a while until it was actually called Godzilla. So Ishiro Honda wasn't Tanaka's first choice to direct, but several other directors passed on the project feeling the idea was stupid, which is interesting. Honda accepted the assignment, and it was during the production of Godzilla that Honda worked with Koji Gojira, and he would go on to work with him on quite a lot of other films, so this was their first. I'm going to talk a little bit about the American cut because I find it quite interesting. Two different opposing
It is a
cuts.
stark comparison, yeah.
So for anyone that doesn't know, Godzilla, of course, is a Japanese production from Toho, but following the success, they sold the rights to Godzilla for only $25,000, which, looking back now, is
Nothing.
for a character that huge. As well,
Literally.
yeah, literally. But it was very heavily edited.
Yes, they cut out a lot of the anti-nuclear connotations and things like that.
And also, didn't they come from the standpoint of almost like a reporter reporting on it?
For a lot of it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they kind of refilmed scenes and then sort of
They had
cut in
a
little other bits.
Japanese translator for the Raymond Burr character.
Yeah, Raymond Burr was the star of the American cut. Also was retitled Godzilla King of the Monsters.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to do pretty well in America as well as in Japan. So that's all the history side of things out of the way. Let's get into the film. The tone of this film is what I think stands out for me, is why I love it so much. Straight from the opening titles, you've got the really sinister music.
Well, that's the thing. You talked about the Lucky Dragon, and in that opening scene with the fishing boat there, that even says on the boat.
Yeah,
Lucky
I
Dragon
mean, even
5.
before this, just the opening titles alone.
Yeah.
You've got the music that really
And
sort
this
of...
is all in black and white.
Yes, very dark.
There's only 2 black and white Godzilla films, just the first 2.
Yes. I quite like the second film I've seen.
Yeah, I need to watch
It
that.
kind of
again.
loses a little bit of the thread from the first one, but I still enjoy it. Interestingly, the music is by Akira Ifukube.
Haven't heard.
I think he's responsible for the iconic Godzilla music.
Ah, okay. Good,
which
good.
Eventually got kind of remixed throughout the film.
Several times.
Yeah.
Do, 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 do.
Yeah, so
But it's interesting you mentioned the black and white because I don't know if this is a sort of sensitive subject, but I feel like it covers a lot of the imperfections of Godzilla.
well, I think if you look at the later
Yep, I
ones,
kind of feel like it makes it
Yeah.
scarier.
well,
Yes.
yeah, definitely. Because you look at the later ones, and people would fob them off as being, oh, it's just a man in a big rubber suit stomping on things. And I mean, I look at it from the perspective of these are great. I love miniatures. You know, they built miniature cities that have been destroyed.
Lots
They've
of
got
map paintings as well.
all this stuff is fantastic. But yes, I can see where you say black and white does tend to mask that quite well.
And it is, we're not going to do like a play-by-play of the film, we're just going to talk about bits, but there are moments where the Godzilla's trampling through the city and he's almost just a silhouette at some points. It's just smoke and lights and you could just see him lumbering through the city, which I think is really effective.
Well, anyway, it's very much an anti-war film, but at the time there was a lot of external censorship and things that they couldn't have like actual nuclear bomb films
So they had to almost
presenting it in a negative way, so they had to kind of make a manifestation of this nuclear threat, and that took the form of Godzilla.
I mean, there's even a shot where I think at one point they're like quite high up on a building and his head sort of comes up and his head is almost like the shape of a mushroom cloud and it almost looks like he is kind of, there is a nuclear bomb going off, which I thought was quite cool.
And I mean, it's very obvious at times that it is this nuclear metaphor because he's literally breathing fire onto the streets and it's hitting everyone and everything. There is no discrimination. It's all just destruction.
And you see a lot of in this one as well, you see a lot of like the pain and anguish from the
well, you see all the
citizens,
victims in like, hospitals and things.
which I think they kind of lose in the future films. They kind
Well,
of
the future
lose
ones
that.
do become orientated more towards entertainment, especially for kids.
The
I
monster
would say.
fights.
So,
Yeah, that's something I was going to lead on to. I would have really loved to have seen this tone kind of carried through into more films, which is why I think, I know it's not very popular here, but I quite like Shin Godzilla because it kind of takes it back to those sort of horror-y, sort of
I'd
darker
say
tones.
a similar one would be The Return of Godzilla, which was in 1984.
Right, okay, I might check that one out. So it's designed to be, as we've said, a nuclear allegory, but I feel like the American cut kind of strips all of that out.
Yeah, it takes a lot of the kind of shots of people being killed.
I think a lot of the time as well, I noticed watching both cuts, there's scenes where, like we say, some of the victims are reacting to what's happening. And in the American cut, they turn the music up so loud that you can't even hear what the people are saying, because I feel like there must have been some kind of...
Yeah, I remember that there's a scene.
Embarrassment for the Americans.
There's a scene where a woman is like holding her child, and they're gonna die, and they're talking about we're gonna join our father soon and stuff, and it was like really like, oh God, this
In the
is
American
super
cut,
dark.
they bump the music up so you can't hear what she's saying.
Yeah, but there was also a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment in America as well.
Mm.
I would think it would probably be quite a difficult thing to actually put in movie theatres because there was a lot of anti-Japanese sentiment. So, would people go to a movie that's about Japanese?
Yeah.
You know, unfortunately, that's the way it was.
So, yeah, I think this is probably my favourite of the Godzilla films because of the tone.
I would agree to an extent that it's definitely the most powerful.
Interesting we said about it kind of gets aimed towards children.
Later on.
Why, we could talk about this a bit later on, but why did it become such a kind of kid-friendly thing, considering it's had such dark origins? It's kind of interesting. I can't think of another example of a character that's had such sort of dark beginnings and then become like a kid's mascot for Japan.
Is it kind of equatable to even Darth Vader? A character has become so iconic and so popular that
But he's still evil
even gets
throughout
a
all of
redemption.
the films, whereas Godzilla becomes almost like the hero, doesn't he, in a lot of the future
Yeah, I'm kind of an anti-hero in a sort of way because although Godzilla in a lot of the movies helps to win the day for the humans, if you like, still it goes on generally it's a little rampage where it's destruction
there is
everywhere.
definitely a big paradigm shift throughout the Showa series.
Yeah.
That literally they take the idea of Godzilla and change it to be the answer to something else, like pollution, Godzilla versus Hedorah, aliens, for instance, later on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it's got to go along with the shift with a lot of movies. Dinosaurs and monster movies become popular. Yeah, I mean, American movies like Valley of the Gwangi and things like that, where you've got dinosaurs, become incredibly popular. If you've got a popular character that is going to sell movies and is going to make money, then
T-Rex, Jurassic Park.
We've already had
follow down that path.
We've already had King Kong by this point, have we? 1933. So it's not the first of its sort of kind with giant monsters, but it is.
It's the first one with those kind of nuclear connotations.
Yeah. So Godzilla was released in Nagoya on October 27th, 1954, and released nationwide on November 3rd, 1954.
Hey, Godzilla Day!
Yay!
At the time of the film's release, it set new opening day record for any Toho film, selling 33,000 tickets at Toho Cinema in Tokyo and selling out a Nishigeki theatre. As a result, Toho's CEO personally called Honda to congratulate him. Honda's wife Kimi noted that sort of thing didn't usually happen. So, big success in Japan, which is, again, interesting because it is such a dark thing, and I think 1945 would have been the nuclear bombs, so it's only 9 years later.
Yeah,
from such a sort of
that's still a fresh sense of.
I think if nobody's seen the original Godzilla and they based their idea of Godzilla on the movies that came out through the 70s and onwards, where it's a lot more kiddified, then people really should go back and revisit the origin.
Yeah, for the most part, when I talk to other people that like Godzilla films, they seem to jump onto the Godzilla films later on, where it's more friendly.
Well, take it from me. I mean, as a kid growing up in the 70s, that's my earliest childhood memories of seeing Godzilla movies. And of course, we only had 3 channels on the TV, and it was kind of like, oh, what on earth is this? When you suddenly got to a Sunday afternoon and you've never seen it before, and they've stuck on a Godzilla movie. And
they're so out there, aren't they?
This is not just... Yeah, but the thing it wasn't like seeing King Kong or something like that, because remember, King Kong, seeing the black and white King Kong is a big gorilla, but he fights dinosaurs in that on Skull Island. But with Godzilla, suddenly you've got this thing that is just, in comparison to King Kong, huge, gigantic, this... Well, as we know now, called kaijus, and so that was quite an eye-opener.
Well, they scaled him up for the showdown.
yeah, they scaled him up for the showdown, but yeah, and so that's my introduction was not seeing the original Godzilla, because as far as I can remember, they never showed the original Godzilla back then.
There is actually a reason for that, which I'll get onto eventually.
Okay. Yeah, for me personally, it was Buzz. You introduced me to Godzilla with the DVD. Terror of Mechagodzilla.
Just because I do like Mechagodzilla. Don't think Mechagodzilla was the first. Don't think that was the first movie I ever saw. My earliest memories are this moment where Godzilla is playing tennis with Ibra.
Oh yeah.
Where Godzilla's picked up a rock and he throws it out to sea. At the Ibra listeners is like a big lobster, monster, and then he bats it back with his claw, and then Godzilla hits it back with his tail, and it goes backwards, and it's like, what am I watching?
you say that, but it's like so totally different in tone to what we were talking about with the first Godzilla film. It's how does it go from then to there?
What's the name of that movie, Zach?
Which one?
The one with Ibra and...
Ibra Horror from the Deep.
Is that's the movie I'm talking about?
Yep.
Okay, because...
I think they do repeat the scene in Godzilla's Revenge.
Right.
Because they use stock footage for
Because I also remember, is it The Son of Godzilla?
Yes.
Where you've got the giant
That's the
praying
one
mantis.
after it, yeah.
Right, so the giant praying mantis, and you've got what I called Spygra, but I think the name is...
In the dub, they call it Spyga.
Spyga.
But actually, it's called Kumunga.
Kumunga. And I just remember going to school and we were all talking about Spygra, this giant thing. It was great fun. And you had the little mini Godzilla, which I don't think it had a name in that movie.
No, not specifically in that movie.
And again, the comedy.
It was only later.
Comedy moments.
It was only later they gave it.
Godzilla was trying to teach the baby Godzilla to breatge nuclear fire.
It just blew smoke rings.
And he ends up standing on its tail, and then it goes.
Which was funny.
But it was kept getting picked on by the giant praying mantis.
Yeah.
Because they were beating it up all the time.
Yeah, I think they wanted to eat it.
Which is, we keep referring to Godzilla as him. Have we got a definition? Because obviously this is son of Godzilla. But if I recall, the praying mantis cracked open an egg. So did Godzilla lay the egg?
Or did he adopt?
Or was the egg already there?
The egg was already there. The egg was buried.
Yeah, but is Godzilla male or female? Do we know?
Male. I'd say male.
Okay, just wondered. Anyway, you were saying about the original.
Yeah, so this might answer the question possibly. Mm-hmm. So from 1955 into the 1960s, Godzilla played in theatres catering to Japanese Americans in predominantly Japanese neighbourhoods in the United States. An English subtitled version was shown at film festivals in New York, Chicago and other cities in 1982. An 84-minute cut of the Japanese version was theatrically released in West Germany in 1956 as Godzilla, was just titled Godzilla. This version removes the Japanese Parliament argument, acknowledgement of Godzilla as a child of the H-bomb, because obviously it was in Germany, so it was quite, references to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and an altered translation of the mother holding her children.
Right.
So that's another case that the film's been changed in different countries.
Wasn't there an Italian version called Godzilla?
Godzilla?
Yeah. That came out much later, though.
Yeah. But I don't recall it being aired. The original, I'm sure it has been aired on British TV, but I don't recall seeing it ever in the 70s.
So the film was re-released theatrically in Japan in 1982 to commemorate Toho's 50th anniversary. After its release, the film remained unavailable officially in the United States until 2004. So I did take that as being the United Kingdom as well, because it tends to be
I think that it was really hard to come by at all anywhere.
So that would explain why you never really saw
the turn of the millennium.
But it was through the fun, if you like, of growing up seeing the odd, and it was odd, and never in sequence, never weren't sequential. It was just randomly what you might be getting the opportunity to see, seeing those kind of more fun monster movies, if you like, which got me hooked on Godzilla and made me want to go and see where it came from, where it came from, and then obviously where it went after that.
So this Godzilla film is part of the series known as the Showa era of films, which eventually ended with Terror of Mechagodzilla, also directed by Ishiro Honda and released in 1975. And of course we know that Godzilla as a film franchise, as well as a character, went on to become a huge pop culture icon.
Well, that's right. When it comes to the 80s, we were suddenly, I'm sure it was the 80s, I'm sure it didn't start in the 70s, but in the 80s you had the cartoon series of Godzilla.
Godzilla,
and it had
Godzuki, who could fly.
Got wings under his arm. But they became incredibly popular. It was like on the most popular time, Saturday morning, kids' TV, you suddenly had this Godzilla cartoon series.
We've actually got 3 episodes of that on DVD. It's very hard to come by.
With the first Godzilla film, I just find it fascinating seeing what this film was intended to be versus what it became, and even now what it is, like with the American legendary films that we've got up until literally last year. They did the most recent one. It's just become sort of big giant monster entertainment, where its origins are so much darker.
Yeah, the current batch, which I've enjoyed watching, have been very much along the lines of, I suppose, same with the Pacific Rim movies, was
sci-fi design.
With the what was it called, the Jaeger robots fighting against the other kaiju. It becomes, that's it. These are big action movies.
Big
But I
blockbusters.
certainly agree with what you brought up earlier, Zach, that I wouldn't say cartoony, but the more child-orientated Godzilla movies through the 70s and probably into the 80s, they did deal with a lot of ecological issues.
Yeah, pollution and stuff.
and
They just
things as well.
made a lighter sort of tone.
They even did one based on bullies.
Yeah.
I suppose
About
in
not
a-
allowing yourself to be bullied.
I suppose on a side note, we do tend to, as in culture, we tend to make light of things, maybe to that extent. But for example, World War II is such a catastrophic event that happened. Yet we sell games of World War II. We can play games,
Yep.
shoot people, and we sell that to kids. So I suppose to a certain extent, that's kind of what happened with Godzilla. It was such a dark thing, but it also, because it made so much money, it was marketed towards the sort of family.
Marketed all children, marketed...
Would you say that would kind of perpetuate it to make it last longer by kind of adapting it to different things?
I mean, yeah, possibly.
But it's still, but I'll say
it's smart business, but-
still had themes in it. Themes that were meant to be there to. It's not just an entertaining.
It's not just a
film
blind entertainment.
for the kids, but it had social
Implications.
to teach them not to be litterbugs, not to do this, not to do that. Whereas the new movies are action movies, and they don't really deal with
That much.
any kind of global.
It's all about the
warming issues
spectacle
or anything.
nowadays.
Yeah.
I mean, you've got the kind of Mechagodzilla in the most recent one, which is kind of, I guess, a poke at the kind of tech companies that are making progress in the
Yeah, I think it was
technology world. but-
Apex is the company.
Yeah,
in
I
that.
suppose that's probably the only sort of allegory, but yeah, it's interesting. I just find it an interesting trajectory that this character's gone on.
Yeah, well, I say, huge franchise.